Before we begin, I want to say something clearly and honestly. Some of what I'm about to say may unsettle people who have spent years in meditation or spiritual practice. That's understandable. Dimensional rendering theory is not a spiritual teaching. It is not designed to comfort, reassure, or preserve cherished interpretations. It is an ontological framework. It is deliberately austere, non-teleological, and non-phenomenological. It does not ask what we hope is true. It asks what must be true if we take the structure of appearance seriously. But this is not meant to be cynical or dismissive. It is meant to be precise, and ultimately, it is meant to be liberating. Because clarity, even when it unsettles, is more freeing than beautiful stories. This is Dimensions. I'm Bill. I'll be your host for today's episode. Let's start with something simple. Across cultures and history, people report remarkably similar experiences. In deep meditation, in samadhi, in near-death experiences, in lucid dreams, in psychedelic states, and sometimes spontaneously, the descriptions repeat themselves. Boundaries dissolve, time seems to vanish, the sense of being a separate self fades or disappears. The world feels unified, vast, immediate, and deeply real. These experiences often feel more real than ordinary life. And because of that, they are almost always interpreted as revelations, a higher dimension, a deeper reality, the ground of being, God, the absolute. But here is the question dimensional rendering theory asks, not what do these experiences mean, but how are they produced? DRT approaches mystical experience structurally, not spiritually, and not dismissively. It does not say these states are illusions, and it does not say they reveal ultimate reality. It says something more precise. They are changes in how the interface renders the world. Under ordinary conditions, your mind enforces a very strict grammar. It enforces space. It enforces time. It enforces identity. It enforces the boundary between me and what I am experiencing. This grammar is not passive. It is active. It is continuously imposed to keep experience navigable, predictable, and stable. But in meditation, absorption, trauma, or chemical disruption, this enforcement can relax, not disappear, not break, but soften. DRT calls this dimensional relaxation. When constraints relax, something very specific happens. Space stops feeling like a container. Time stops feeling like a sequence. The self stops feeling like a center. Experience becomes more field-like, less segmented, less divided. Nothing new has been added. What has changed is how much structure is being imposed. This explains something important. Mystical states don't feel profound because they show you something hidden. They feel profound because the mechanisms that normally divide experience have gone quiet. When boundaries stop being drawn, the absence of boundaries feels like vastness. When sequencing stops being enforced, the absence of sequence feels like eternity. When identity dissolves, the absence of a center feels like unity. This is not a revelation about the universe. It is a revelation about the interface. Let's talk about meditation in space. In deep meditation, people often report that they are no longer located anywhere, that the body dissolves, that inside and outside lose meaning. But this is not because they entered a higher space. It's because spatial localization is being enforced less strongly. Space is not something you discover. It is something your mind is continuously constructing and maintaining. When that construction quiets, space thins. Not because you left it, but because it was never fundamental to begin with. The same is true of time. Time is not something flowing out there in the universe. It is a method your mind uses to organize experience into sequence, memory, and anticipation. When narrative activity quiets, when memory and expectation loosen their grip, the slice stops enforcing temporal structure. Experience no longer feels like it's moving. Not because you reached eternity, but because the sequencing function has gone quiet. Now let's talk about samadhi. In its deepest forms, samadhi is extraordinary. There is awareness, but no sense of being someone, no subject, no object, no here, no there, no before, no after. And because of that, samadhi is almost always interpreted as contact with something absolute. But in DRT, samadhi is not a metaphysical breakthrough. It is rendering at minimal constraint. The interface is still running. But almost all higher order grammar has been removed. No identity, no spatial frame, no temporal sequencing, no narrative. Rendering continues, but stripped to the bare minimum. That is why samadhi feels so clear, so stable, and so undivided. Not because it shows ultimate reality, but because it has stopped adding most of the scaffolding. Samadhi does not reveal the substrate. The substrate cannot be experienced at all, because experience itself is rendering. What samadhi reveals is something more subtle and more honest. That identity, time, space, and separation are optional constraints, not necessities. This is why mystical states feel universal across cultures. Not because everyone is visiting the same hidden realm, but because everyone shares the same interface. And when that interface relaxes in similar ways, it produces similar experiences. What differs is the story told afterward. One culture calls it God. Another calls it emptiness. Another calls it cosmic consciousness. Another calls it the absolute. But those interpretations come after the interface shift, not from it. DRT does not diminish these experiences. It makes them more precise. They are not delusions. They are not revelations. They are interface phenomena. They show that the world you normally live in is not reality itself. It is a particular way reality is being rendered. They show that the slice is flexible, that its grammar can loosen, that ordinary consciousness is only one stable configuration among many. But they do not take you beyond the slice. They show you the slice by partially suspending it. And now, let me return to where we started. Dimensional rendering theory is not a spiritual path. It does not offer salvation, enlightenment, or transcendence. It is not here to preserve meaning. It is here to clarify structure. That may feel colder than spiritual language, but clarity has its own kind of freedom. Because when you stop mistaking interface effects for ultimate reality, you stop chasing mirages. You stop inflating experiences into metaphysics. You stop burdening practice with expectations it was never meant to fulfill. What remains is quieter, more honest, and strangely, more liberating. Not because it promises something higher, but because it shows you what is actually happening. This has been Dimensions. If you found this worthwhile, consider subscribing, following, and returning for future episodes exploring deep questions about reality, consciousness, and the hidden architecture of appearance.